The scream that shattered Pine Hollow's morning wasn't just loud, it was prehistoric. It was the sound of a woman who had spent 3 years in a concrete box feeding on nothing but her own self-righteousness. This place should be demolished. I didn't move. I stayed right there in my Adirondack chair on the porch, my fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the heat settle before looking up. There she was, Barbara Henderson, our former HOA president, recently paroled and looking every bit the suburban dictator she used to be. She was standing on the edge of my gravel drive, her steel-grey hair pulled into that same severe bun, so tight it looked painful, and her eyes darting around like a general surveying a lost battlefield. She looked at my cabin, the 19th century cedar structure she'd tried to erase from the earth for a decade, and her jaw literally hung slack. In her mind, this house should have been a pile of ash and splinters years ago. Instead, the cedar walls glowed in the morning sun, the historical preservation plaque gleamed on the door, and I was sitting right where she left me. She had no idea that while she was counting cracks in a prison ceiling, the world had shifted beneath her sensible orthopedic shoes. "Robert Mitchell," she bellowed, jabbing a finger toward the cabin. "This eyesore was supposed to be condemned years ago. I filed the paperwork. I had the inspections scheduled. I did everything legally required." I didn't stand up. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at her with a faint, almost pitying smile. "Morning, Barbara. I see the state's hospitality didn't do much for your temperament. You're trespassing, by the way." "Trespassing?" She let out a jagged, hysterical laugh and stepped over the property line as if it didn't exist. "I am the president of this association. I don't trespass, I inspect." She started marching toward my porch, her pace quickening with every step, fueled by 3 years of suppressed rage. But as she hit the 3-foot mark onto my lawn, a sharp, rhythmic chirp-chirp-chirp erupted from her ankle. The electronic monitor, a tether to reality she was currently trying to snap. "You should have been evicted," she shouted, her voice cracking as she ignored the warning beeps. "This neighborhood was supposed to be neat, uniform, beautiful. Without this shack." I glanced at my watch. 52 seconds, I muttered. "What?" she spat, now standing at the base of my porch steps, her face a mottled purple. "That's how long it took for the silent alarm at the monitoring station to trigger a dispatch," I said, leaning forward. "You're on a very short leash, Barbara, and you just choked yourself with it." The sound of a high-performance engine echoed through the cul-de-sac. A white and black patrol car slid into view with predatory grace, stopping exactly behind Barbara's SUV. Officer Williams stepped out. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked like a man who had been expecting this call since the moment Barbara's bus pulled into the station. "Ma'am," Williams called out, his hand resting casually on his belt. "You need to step away from the property immediately. You are in direct violation of your release conditions." Barbara whirled around, her face cycling through confusion, indignation, and finally, a dawning, sickening horror. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The HOA queen was being addressed like a common nuisance, and her brain couldn't process the filing error. "Officer, you don't understand," she stammered, pointing a trembling hand back at me. He's kept this illegal structure standing. He's mocking the bylaws. I am the president." "You aren't the president of anything, Barbara," I said, finally standing up and walking to the edge of the porch. "You were removed by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members 2 weeks after your sentencing. You don't even have a seat at the table." Williams didn't wait for her rebuttal. He moved with practiced professional efficiency. Before Barbara could utter another syllable of her conspiracy, he had her arm behind her back. With a firm, downward pressure, he guided her face first into the soft mulch of my rhododendron bushes. The ankle monitor finally fell silent as her GPS updated to "in custody." "This is harassment," she screamed into the dirt, her face smeared with damp earth and wood chips. "He orchestrated this. He's been waiting for me." "I didn't have to orchestrate anything, Barbara," I said, looking down at her as the handcuffs clicked, a sound that, quite frankly, was more satisfying than any music I'd ever heard. "I just knew you couldn't help yourself. You're a moth and my eyesore is the flame." By now, the neighbors were drifting out. Mrs. Patterson was watching from her window with a look of pure serenity. The Johnsons stood in their driveway, arms crossed, nodding as the backup cruiser rolled in. These were the people Barbara had terrorized for years. People she'd fined $500 for the wrong shade of black on a mailbox or measured their grass with a literal ruler at 6:00 a.m. As Williams led a mud-streaked, weeping Barbara to the backseat of the cruiser, her parole officer stepped out of an unmarked sedan. He didn't even look at her. He just handed a folder to Williams and gave me a brief, respectful nod. They'd been waiting for this, we all had. The patrol car pulled away, and for the first time in years, Pine Hollow felt like it could actually breathe. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I sat back down, my coffee now lukewarm, and watched the street return to its natural state. Barbara thought she was returning to a neighborhood she owned. She thought she was the protagonist in a story about reclaiming her throne. She had no idea that I hadn't just been keeping the cabin standing while she was gone. I'd been busy. See, Barbara's reign of terror had a side effect she never anticipated. It tanked property values. People were so desperate to escape her utopia that they were selling for pennies on the dollar. And while she was in a cell, I was in the market. I didn't just buy my cabin's safety, I bought the neighborhood. Through a series of LLCs, I'd purchased 6 of the surrounding homes that had fallen into neglect or foreclosure during her legal drama. I'd renovated them, filled them with families who actually liked each other, and quietly dismantled the bylaw enforcement committee from the inside. Over the next few days, the reality of the new Pine Hollow began to bleed through Barbara's delusions. She was out on bail within 48 hours, pending her formal revocation hearing, and she spent that time acting like a ghost queen in a ruined palace. I watched her from my window on Tuesday. She stood on the sidewalk, frantically dialing numbers on her cell phone. I could hear her from 50 feet away. "This is Barbara Henderson. We need an emergency HOA session. The Mitchell situation has escalated." Wait 10 seconds and then stare at the screen in bewilderment. No one was answering. The board members she'd spent years bullying had blocked her number years ago. She was a woman shouting into a void. On Wednesday, she tried the door-to-door intimidation play. She had a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her face set in a grim mask of duty. She marched up to Mrs. Patterson's door to lecture her about non-regulation garden gnomes. Mrs. Patterson didn't even open the door. She just pulled the curtain back, looked Barbara in the eye, and closed it again. Barbara stood there for a full minute, her hand poised to knock again, her confidence visibly leaking out of her. She made a frantic note on her clipboard, probably a violation notice, but her hand was shaking. She moved to the Johnsons' house next. They were in the driveway washing their car. When Barbara started her property standards speech, Mr. Johnson just turned the volume up on his radio and kept scrubbing. By Friday, the cracks in her psyche were wide enough to walk through. She went to the community center, the crown jewel of her former empire. She tried her master key at the gate. It didn't turn. She tried the pool house. Nothing. She tried the maintenance shed where she used to keep her compliance tools. Locked. She stood in the empty parking lot, rattling the gate like a caged animal. "They changed the locks," she shrieked at the sky. "It's a conspiracy. They're locking me out of my own neighborhood." That was the moment it finally hit her. It wasn't that we were rebelling against her. It was that we had outgrown her. We had moved on. She walked back toward my cabin late that afternoon, her clipboard hanging loosely at her side. She looked smaller. The severe bun was coming undone, wisps of grey hair fluttering in the breeze. She stopped at my property line, staring at the cabin she hated so much. I walked down to the edge of the lawn. "You know, Barbara," I said quietly, "you spent so much time measuring the height of the grass that you never noticed the roots were rotting. You didn't build a community. You built a prison. And the funny thing about prisons is, once the warden leaves, the inmates realize the doors were never actually locked." She looked at me, her eyes wet and unfocused. "I was maintaining the value," she whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves. "I was keeping it perfect." "No," I replied, "you were keeping it yours. There's a difference." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, laminated card. It was the official record from the county clerk's office. "Since you're so fond of paperwork, you should read this. It's the new HOA charter. We dissolved the old association 6 months ago. We're a voluntary neighborhood collective now. No fines, no rulers, no dictators." She stared at the card as if I were speaking a foreign language. "And there's one more thing," I added, letting a bit of that sarcastic edge sharpen my voice. "The house you're living in, the one you defaulted on the taxes for while you were away, the bank sold the deed to a holding company last month." Her eyes went wide. "What?" "I'm your landlord, Barbara, and I've decided to renovate. Your eviction notice is being served on Monday. I think I'll turn your place into a community garden. I hear rhododendrons grow really well in that soil." The clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the asphalt. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Barbara Henderson, the woman who lived for control, finally realized she didn't even own the ground she was standing on. She turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy and hollow, disappearing into the shadows of a neighborhood that no longer knew her name. I picked up her clipboard, tossed it into the recycling bin, and went back inside to finish my coffee. It was finally, truly, a beautiful morning in Pine Hollow.